The rain had just stopped when Ethan Cole parked his black car outside the Harborview restaurant. Through the windshield, he could see the lights of the Boston waterfront shimmering on the wet pavement, and beyond them, the dark water of the harbor moving slow and quiet. It looked like an ordinary evening. He had no way of knowing that the next 10 minutes would change everything. He checked his watch. 8 o'clock. His business dinner was supposed to start in 5 minutes, and Ethan Cole did not like being late. He stepped out of the car, adjusted the collar of his coat, and started walking toward the warm glow of the restaurant's front doors. He never reached them. A young woman came rushing out of the side entrance, almost slipping on the wet stone. She still had her waitress apron on, half untied, and a dish towel was still clutched in one hand, like she had run out in the middle of her shift. She looked left, then right, and the second her eyes landed on Ethan, she moved straight toward him. "Stop," she said, breathing hard. "Don't go inside." Ethan slowed, but did not stop completely. He had met a lot of strange people in his line of work, and a part of his brain was already calculating exits, angles, the distance back to his car. "Excuse me? Please." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're Ethan Cole, right? The men who reserved the private dining room. They're waiting for you. But it's not a business dinner. Not really." He studied her. She was in her late 20s, with soft features, warm brown eyes, and a full, curvy figure that the plain black uniform could not hide. There was a name tag pinned crooked above her chest that read Sophia. She did not look like someone playing a game. She looked genuinely scared, and that, more than anything, made him pause. "And how would a waitress know what kind of dinner this is?" he asked. "Because I've been serving them drinks for the last hour," Sophia said, "and they don't think I'm listening. People never think the waitress is listening." Ethan glanced toward the front windows. He could see the soft shapes of people inside, but the private room was tucked toward the back, out of view. "Go on." Sophia wet her lips, and the words came out fast. "There are 4 of them, maybe 5. They're not the people you were told you'd be meeting. I heard them talking about a painting, something called the Harbor Light. It went missing a long time ago, and they all want it back. And the whole reason they invited you here tonight is because they're convinced you know where it is." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. The wind off the water tugged at his coat. "A painting," he finally repeated. "The Harbor Light," she said again. They kept saying it like it mattered more than money. One of them said, and I'm quoting him, that you were the last piece they needed. Ethan felt the strangest thing then. Not fear, confusion. Because in all his years, with all the deals and all the enemies he had collected, he had never once heard of a painting called The Harbor Light. He had no idea what these men were talking about. And men who believed you held something valuable, when you held nothing at all, were the most dangerous men of all. They would not stop asking. They would not believe a denial. "You're sure they meant me?" he said quietly. "They said your name, twice." Sophia's hand tightened around the towel. "Look, I don't know who you are or what you've done. It's not my business. But I couldn't just stand there and let you walk into that room. It felt wrong." Ethan looked at her for a moment longer than he meant to. People rarely did things for him without wanting something back. This woman had run out into the cold and risked her job to warn a complete stranger, and she clearly wanted nothing at all. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it. "Go back inside before they notice you're gone. Act normal. Tell them I never showed." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to leave," he said, already turning. "And then I'm going to find out what a painting has to do with me." He walked quickly back to his car, slid behind the wheel, and pulled away from the curb without turning the headlights on until he was half a block down the street. In the mirror, he watched the restaurant shrink behind him, golden and warm and full of men waiting for someone who would never come. Sophia stood on the wet pavement, watching the taillights disappear, her heart was still pounding. She had just done something completely insane, and she did not regret it for a second. She turned to go back inside, and froze. Something one of the men had said earlier surfaced in her memory, a single name she had not thought twice about while pouring his wine. He had leaned toward the others and murmured it like a secret. Grace Whitmore. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. The towel slipped from her fingers and landed on the ground, because Grace Whitmore was not a stranger. Grace Whitmore was her grandmother. Sophia barely slept that night. By morning she was already on the road to Salem, the coffee in her cup going cold in the holder as she drove. She had spent the dark hours turning the same questions over and over. Why would a group of dangerous men say her grandmother's name? What could a gentle old woman who baked bread on Sundays possibly have to do with a missing painting? There was one more thing she could not shake. Before she left the restaurant the night before, she had taken Ethan's card from the table where he'd left it. He had pressed it into her hand at the curb without her noticing until later. "In case you remember anything else," he'd said. She had not called him yet. First, she wanted answers from the one person who might actually have them. Grace Whitmore lived in a narrow blue house at the end of a quiet street, the kind of place that smelled like cinnamon and old books. She opened the door before Sophia even knocked, her face lighting up at the sight of her granddaughter. "2 visits in 1 month," Grace said, pulling her into a hug. "What did I do to deserve this? Can I come in, Grandma? I need to ask you something." They sat in the small kitchen with tea between them. Sophia watched the steam rise and tried to find the right words. There weren't any, so she just said it plainly. "Grandma, have you ever heard of a painting called The Harbor Light?" The change in Grace was instant. Her smile faded. Her hands, which had been wrapped warmly around her cup, went still. For a moment, she looked like she might pretend she hadn't heard. "Where did you hear that name?" Grace asked. "Some men at the restaurant. They were talking about it last night. They mentioned you by name." Sophia leaned forward. "Grandma, who are these people? Why would they know you?" Grace set her tea down very slowly. The silence stretched so long that Sophia thought she might never answer. Then the old woman sighed, and something in her seemed to fold inward, as if a weight she had carried for 40 years had suddenly grown heavy again. "I was going to take this to my grave," Grace said quietly. "I didn't think it would ever come back." "Take what to your grave?" "Before I married your grandfather, I had a different life. A career." Grace's eyes drifted toward the window. "I was an art restorer. A good one. I worked with old paintings, cleaning them, repairing the frames, bringing them back to life. People trusted me with valuable things." Sophia had never heard a word of this. The grandmother she knew had always been a homemaker, a woman of gardens and quilts. "I didn't know that. There was a lot I didn't talk about." Grace's voice dropped lower. "The Harbor Light came through my workshop once, a long time ago, just for a few days. A man brought it in privately and asked me to repair the frame. He paid in cash, and he asked me not to write his name anywhere." "Was it expensive, the painting?" Grace shook her head. "That's the strange part. It wasn't. It was a simple seascape, a lighthouse, some water, nothing remarkable. Any gallery would have valued it at almost nothing. I remember thinking it odd that anyone would pay so much to have such an ordinary painting fixed. Then why does everyone want it?" Grace looked at her granddaughter for a long, careful moment, as though deciding how far to open a door that had been shut for decades. "Because of the frame," she said at last. "Not the painting, the frame." Sophia held her breath. "What do you mean?" "When I took it apart to repair it, I found something I wasn't meant to find. The wooden frame wasn't solid. It had been built with hidden compartments inside it. Small hollow spaces, carved out and sealed shut, all along the back edges." Grace's fingers traced the rim of her teacup, as if remembering the shape of the wood. I never opened them. I told myself it was none of my business. I fixed the frame, I handed it back, and I tried very hard to forget the whole thing. What was inside the compartments? I don't know. I swear to you I never looked. Grace reached across the table and took Sophia's hand, but whatever it was, the man who brought it to me was terrified of losing it. And now, after all these years, those men are saying my name. That frightens me more than I can tell you. Sophia squeezed her grandmother's hand. We'll figure it out together. You wrote things down, didn't you? When you worked, you always keep notes about everything. Grace's face brightened with sudden hope. My journals. Yes, I kept detailed records of every piece I worked on. Measurements, sketches, everything. They're in the attic, in an old trunk. If I described that frame, the answer might be in there. She rose at once, surprisingly quick for her age, and led Sophia up the narrow staircase to the attic. Dust hung in the slanting morning light. Grace went straight to a battered wooden trunk in the corner and lifted the lid with trembling hands. She stared into it. Then she began pushing things aside, faster and faster, her breath coming short. They're gone, Grace whispered. What? My restoration journals. Every single one of them. Grace turned, her face pale as the dust around them. They were here. They've always been here. And now they're gone. Sophia felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Someone had already been inside this house. Someone had reached the answers before they did. Sophia called Ethan from her car outside her grandmother's house, her hands still shaking. She told him everything. The art restoration, the frame with the hidden compartments, the journals that had vanished from a locked attic. Ethan listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Someone wanted those notes badly enough to break into an old woman's house, he said finally. That tells me this is bigger than a painting. Meet me tomorrow. I know someone who might help us understand what we're dealing with. That was how Sophia found herself, walking into the Boston Public Archives the next morning, a place she had passed 100 times and never once entered. Ethan was already waiting on the stone steps, looking out of place in his dark coat among the students and researchers. Beside him stood a wiry man in his 50s, with sharp eyes and a worn leather bag slung across his chest. Sophia, this is Jack Mercer, Ethan said. Jack and I go back a long way. He's a journalist. 20 years chasing stories nobody else would touch. Jack shook her hand with a firm grip. Ethan tells me you stopped him from walking into a room full of trouble. That makes you smarter than most people I meet. They settled at a long table in a quiet corner of the reading room, surrounded by the smell of old paper. Jack pulled a thick folder from his bag and spread documents across the table with the ease of a man who had done this 1,000 times. When Ethan called me, I almost laughed, Jack said. The Harbor Light. I've heard that name whispered for years. I never thought I'd actually be chasing it. He tapped a yellowed newspaper clipping. Here's what I can tell you. That painting vanished close to 40 years ago. It disappeared during a private estate sale up the coast. One day, it was on a list of items to be sold. The next, it simply wasn't there. No record of who bought it, no police report, nothing. Sophia leaned closer. People just let it disappear? That's the thing. On paper, it was worth almost nothing. A small seascape by an unknown artist. Why would anyone file a report over a painting that cheap? Jack's eyes glittered. But here's what I've spent years figuring out. For something that supposedly had no value, a surprising number of wealthy collectors have been quietly hunting for it ever since. I've tracked at least 6 of them over the decades. Every time it surfaces in some rumor, they all start moving at once. Ethan crossed his arms. And none of them care about the painting itself. Not even a little, Jack agreed. They care about what's rumored to be hidden in the frame. Nobody knows exactly what. Some say documents. Some say something else entirely. The legend has grown so big over the years that the truth got buried under it. Sophia thought of her grandmother's pale face in the attic. My grandmother handled that frame. She found the hidden compartments herself, decades ago. She never opened them. Jack went very still. Your grandmother touched the harbor light? And someone just stole her records about it. For the first time, Jack looked genuinely shaken. He pulled out a notebook and began writing fast. That changes things. If they're after her notes, it means the painting itself has moved out of reach, and they're trying to trace its path another way. He flipped through his folder again, frowning, until he stopped on a single brittle page. Wait, I have something. He laid it carefully in front of them. It was a shipping manifest, the ink faded but still readable, listing cargo moved by a small freight company long out of business. I pulled this from a defunct company's records 2 years ago and never knew what it meant, Jack said. But look here. His finger landed on a line item. A wooden crate. Dimensions matching a framed painting, shipped under a false name. The destination is what matters. Sophia read the words and felt a chill. An abandoned lighthouse property. On the Maine coast. A lighthouse, Ethan repeated slowly, for a painting called The Harbor Light. That's either a coincidence or somebody had a sense of humor. Nothing about this is a coincidence, Jack said. Whoever hid that painting wanted it somewhere remote, somewhere nobody would look twice. An abandoned lighthouse is perfect. Forgotten, hard to reach, owned by no one who'd ask questions. Ethan studied the manifest. He had spent his whole life reading people and situations, weighing risk against reward, and every instinct told him this trail was real. Then that's where we go. If the painting passed through there, it might have left something behind. A clue, a direction. Sophia hesitated. What if it's dangerous? Those men last night didn't seem like the kind who give up. They're not, Jack said grimly, which is exactly why we need to move faster than they do. Right now, we know one thing they don't. We have this manifest, and they're still chasing your grandmother's journals. They agreed to leave for Maine the next day. As they gathered the papers and prepared to go their separate ways, Sophia stepped outside into the cold afternoon and pulled out her phone to call her grandmother. What none of them saw was the man sitting in a parked car across the street, watching the entrance of the archives through tinted glass. His name was Benjamin Cross, and he had been following the trail of the harbor light longer than any of them. He lifted his phone to his ear and spoke quietly. "They've found the lighthouse lead," he said. "We're not the only ones looking anymore." Then he started his engine and drove away, already thinking 3 steps ahead. The drive to the Maine coast took most of the morning. Ethan brought along a 4th person, a young man named Ryan, who said little and noticed everything. Ethan introduced him simply as someone he trusted, a man good with locks, old buildings, and trouble. Sophia decided not to ask too many questions. The lighthouse stood at the end of a long gravel road, perched on a rocky point, where the land gave way to gray, churning water. It had not been used in decades. Paint peeled from its walls in long, curling strips, and the windows were clouded with salt and dust. The wind came off the ocean in cold, steady pushes that made them all pull their coats tighter. "Charming place to hide a painting," Jack muttered, hauling his leather bag over one shoulder. Ryan crouched at the heavy front door and studied the rusted lock. "This hasn't been opened in years," he said. Then he paused, leaning closer. "Except the scratches here are fresh. Someone's been at this recently." Ethan and Sophia exchanged a look. The same cold thought passed between them. They were not the first to come. The door gave way with a groan, and they stepped inside. The air was thick and stale, heavy with the smell of damp stone. A spiral staircase wound up toward the dark top of the tower. The ground floor was a single round room, mostly empty, with a few broken crates and a rotting wooden table left behind by whoever had abandoned the place long ago. "Spread out," Jack said. "Look for anything that doesn't belong. Loose stones, hidden gaps, anything." They searched in silence for the better part of an hour. Sophia ran her hands along the curved walls, feeling for cracks. Ethan checked the floor, testing boards with his foot. It was Ryan who found it. He was tapping along the lower wall when one section gave back a hollow sound instead of solid stone. "Here," he called. "This panel's loose." Ethan knelt beside him, and together they worked their fingers into the seam. The wooden panel came away from the wall with a dry crack, revealing a shallow space behind it. Inside sat a small metal box, gray with age but dry, protected from the sea air. Sophia held her breath as Ethan lifted it out and opened the lid. Inside were papers, brittle but intact, wrapped in oilcloth. "Storage records," Jack said, leaning over them with hungry eyes. He read quickly, flipping through page after page. "These are shipping logs, private ones. Someone kept careful track of where this painting went." He looked up, stunned. It didn't just come here and stay. After it disappeared from that estate sale, it was moved again and again. Look at these dates. It changed hiding places at least 4 times over the years. "So, it wasn't stolen and sold," Ethan said slowly, the pieces turning in his mind. "It was being protected. Someone kept moving it on purpose, staying ahead of whoever was looking." "The painting wasn't taken," Sophia murmured. "It was hidden." Jack nodded grimly. "There's a difference between a thief and a guardian. Whoever did this wasn't trying to sell the harbor light. They were trying to keep it out of the wrong hands." Ryan, still searching the hidden space, pulled out one more item. It was a single folded note, the paper darker than the rest. He handed it to Sophia. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was small and neat, but the message made no sense at first. It was a string of numbers and short phrases, broken up in a way that looked deliberate, like a code meant for someone who already knew how to read it. "It's not random," Jack said, peering at it. "Look at the spacing. This is a message written so only the right person could understand it." He pointed to a line near the bottom, "But this part is plain. A place name." Sophia read it aloud. "Burlington, Vermont." She looked up. "There's a second location. The trail keeps going," Ethan said. "Whoever hid this thing left a path. Lighthouse to Vermont, and probably beyond." A sudden gust rattled the windows, and they all went quiet. Then Ryan held up a hand. He was looking at the rotting table in the center of the room. On its dusty surface, clear as day, were the marks of fresh fingerprints and the clean outline where something had recently been set down and lifted away. "Someone was here," Ryan said quietly. "Days ago, maybe less. They moved fast, and they didn't bother hiding it." Sophia felt her skin prickle. "Then why are these records still here? If someone got here before us, why didn't they take everything?" Ethan straightened, his jaw tight. "Because they don't know about the hidden panel. They searched the obvious places and left. They got the painting's location wrong." A grim half-smile crossed his face. "For once, we're ahead of them." "We need to move," Jack said, already gathering the papers back into the metal box. "If they came here once, they'll come again. And next time, they might look harder." They hurried out of the lighthouse and back into the gray daylight. The ocean roared below the cliffs, and the wind tore at their clothes as they made their way down the gravel path to the car. Sophia paused at the top of the road and looked back at the lonely tower one last time. For 40 years it had kept its secret, standing silent over the cold water while collectors searched everywhere but here. Now the secret was loose, and it was racing ahead of them toward a small city in Vermont. She climbed into the car, the coded note folded carefully in her pocket, and they drove west as the sky darkened behind them. They reached Burlington by evening and checked into a small inn near the lakefront. The coded note sat on the table between them, stubborn and unreadable. Jack had stared at it for hours during the drive without cracking it. And now he sat rubbing his tired eyes while Sophia made tea in the little kitchen. It was Ethan who heard the knock at the door. He moved to the side of it first, the old habit of a careful man, then opened it slowly. A figure stood in the hallway, hands raised and open to show he carried nothing. "Mr. Cole," the man said calmly, "my name is Benjamin Cross. I think it's time we talked." Sophia recognized the name instantly. She had heard it from Jack, spoken like a warning. This was the man who had been chasing the painting longer than anyone. Benjamin was older than she expected, with silver hair and a quiet, tired manner that did not match the dangerous reputation. He stepped inside only when Ethan allowed it, and took a seat at the table without being asked, folding his hands like a man who had rehearsed this moment. "You've been following us," Ethan said. It was not a question. "Since the archives," Benjamin admitted. "I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. I've been searching for the harbor light for the better part of my life. When you started pulling the same threads I did, I had a choice. I could fight you for it, or I could be honest with you." He spread his hands. "I'm too old to fight, so here I am." Jack leaned forward, suspicious. "Forgive me, but the last time anyone went looking for this painting, an old woman's house got broken into, and her journals were stolen. Was that you?" Benjamin's face hardened with something that looked like real disgust. "No, and whoever did that is exactly why I came to you, instead of working against you. There are people hunting this thing who don't care who they hurt. The men who tried to corner you at that restaurant, Mr. Cole, are not patient. I am." Sophia set down the teapot. "Then tell us why you've spent your whole life chasing a painting that's supposedly worthless." Benjamin smiled faintly. "Because I stopped caring about the painting decades ago. I want to know the truth, that's all. When I was a young man, my mentor was obsessed with the harbor light. He swore the frame held something that could rewrite a piece of history. He died still searching for it. I suppose I inherited the question along with his debts." He looked at each of them. "I don't want to sell anything. I don't want to get rich. I just want to know what it was all for, before I'm gone." The room was quiet. Even Jack seemed to soften, recognizing in Benjamin the same hunger that had driven his own life of chasing buried truths. But Sophia did not relax. There was something too smooth about the man, too prepared. People did not usually appear at your door with their whole heart open. "If you've been searching that long," she said slowly, "then you know things we don't. So prove your good faith. What's hidden in the frame?" Benjamin's smile faded. "That's the thing. I genuinely don't know. The rumors say documents, old ones, something about property, land, ownership. But every collector who ever heard the story added their own dream to it. Some believe it's a fortune in jewels, some believe it's a confession. The legend swallowed the facts a long time ago." He leaned back. "I think only the people who hid it ever knew the truth, and they're all dead now." That was when the fourth member of their group spoke. Ethan had brought another person to Burlington, a sharp young researcher named Olivia Bennett, who had spent the entire conversation quietly working at the small desk in the corner, with a laptop and a stack of borrowed library books. She had said barely a word until now. "They might be dead," Olivia said, not looking up. "But they left paper behind. Everyone always does." They all turned to her. "While you've been talking, I've been cross-referencing the names from Jack's manifest against old county records," she said, finally lifting her head. Her eyes were bright with discovery. "And I found something strange. The painting's trail keeps crossing the same handful of land parcels along the coast. Properties that were bought up generations ago by a single shipping family, then somehow lost in the records. There are ownership agreements that were never completed. Land that legally belongs to no one because the paperwork to transfer it simply vanished. Sophia's breath caught. Vanished. Like the journals, like the painting, exactly like them, Olivia said. I don't think this was ever really about art. I think the painting is just where someone hid the answer to a much older question. Who actually owns all that land? Benjamin had gone very still. For a man who claimed to know the legend better than anyone, he looked genuinely surprised. Land, he murmured. All these years, all of us imagining jewels and treasure, and it was deeds, ownership, the most boring thing in the world hidden inside a painting. Boring things are worth finishing for when enough money's attached, Jack said grimly. If that land became valuable over the years, then whoever proves they own it stands to gain a fortune. That's a reason to break into an old woman's attic. Ethan looked at Benjamin for a long moment, weighing him. You said you only want the truth. Then help us find it. But understand this, the first time you lie to me, you're gone. Benjamin nodded slowly. Fair enough. Sophia stared at the coded note on the table, the mystery no longer just about a missing painting. It had grown into something with roots reaching back 100 years, and her own family was tangled somewhere in the middle of it. The coded note finally gave up its secret, in a library in Concord. Olivia had figured out the pattern somewhere along the drive into New Hampshire. The numbers, she explained, were not random at all. They matched a system old archivists once used to catalog documents, a way of pointing to a specific shelf, a specific box, a specific page in a collection that had long since been donated and forgotten. The note was never meant to hide a treasure. It was meant to lead someone to a piece of paper. Whoever wrote this, Olivia said as they pulled up outside the historic library, expected the right person to come along eventually. They left a map for the future, not a wall. The library was a grand old building of brick and tall windows, the kind of place where the floors creaked and every book seemed to be holding its breath. A kind, elderly archivist named Mr. Whitfield led them down into the lower archive when Jack explained, carefully, that they were researching the history of coastal shipping families. It was true enough. Following the numbers from the note, Olivia walked the long rows of shelves with a focus that made the others stay quiet. She counted aisles, then boxes, then ran her finger down a faded ledger until she stopped. Here, she breathed. The box she pulled down was thin and gray, labeled only with a catalog number. Inside, beneath layers of brittle tissue paper, was a single sheet of old drawing paper, folded once. Sophia helped Olivia open it on the wide reading table, careful as if handling glass. It was a sketch, a hand-drawn diagram, delicate and precise, showing the back of a picture frame. Tiny notes covered it in a neat, old-fashioned hand, marking each hidden compartment along the inner edges. Beside each compartment was a number, and beside each number, a short description. Grace's voice came back to Sophia then, from the kitchen in Salem. The wooden frame had hidden compartments built into it. This is it, Sophia whispered. This is the frame from the harbor light. Someone drew exactly where the compartments are and what was meant to go inside each one. Jack leaned over the sketch, reading the small notes aloud. Each compartment held a page, handwritten pages. He looked up sharply. Not one document, several. And the notes here described them as parts of something larger. Olivia had already pulled out the land records she had gathered in Burlington and laid them beside the sketch. Her eyes moved between the two, and slowly her expression changed from curiosity to amazement. They're not separate pages, she said. They fit together. Look at the descriptions. Each page lists a boundary, a marker, a stretch of coastline. Put them all in order, and they form one thing. She traced an invisible line across the table. A map. The pages inside the frame, all together, made a map of land along the coast. The room went silent, except for the hum of the old lights overhead. A map of what exactly? Ethan asked. Olivia spread her research wide. Of properties purchased nearly 100 years ago by a single shipping entrepreneur. Stretches of coastline he bought quietly, piece by piece, over many years. But here's what I couldn't understand until now. She tapped the sketch. The official records for those purchases are incomplete. Half the paperwork never made it into the county files. It's as if someone deliberately kept the proof out of the public record and hid it instead. Hid it inside a painting frame, Sophia said slowly, and then made a coded note pointing to a sketch of that frame so the right person could find it later if the painting was ever lost. Layers within layers, Benjamin murmured. He had stayed quiet through most of it, but now he looked at the sketch with something close to reverence. All these years the collectors thought the value was in the painting, but the painting was only ever the container. The real prize was always the map, and the map was always about land. Jack rubbed his jaw. But why go to all this trouble? Why not just file the documents properly? Why hide proof of who owns land inside a piece of art, and then drag it from one hiding place to another for 40 years? Nobody had an answer. The question hung over them, heavy and strange. Sophia stared at the careful handwriting on the sketch, and a quiet feeling stirred in her chest. There was something familiar in the loops of the letters, in the patient, precise way the notes were written. She had seen handwriting like this before, in birthday cards and recipe cards kept in a kitchen drawer in Salem. It was not her grandmother's hand, but it was close, the kind of close that ran in families. She did not say it out loud. Not yet. The thought was too big, too uncertain, and she needed to be sure before she frightened anyone, including herself. "We have the map now," she said instead, "or at least we know what it shows. But the actual pages are still inside the real frame, wherever the painting ended up." Olivia nodded. And the trail from the lighthouse said the painting kept moving. Lighthouse, then somewhere else. "We need to find where it finally came to rest." Mr. Whitfield, who had been hovering nearby, cleared his throat gently. "If you're tracing old coastal collections," he offered, "the finest private historical holdings in this region are down in Newport. A great many lost things have a way of ending up there, quietly, in collectors' homes. It would be the natural place for something valuable to settle." Ethan met Sophia's eyes across the table. "Then Newport is where we go." Sophia folded the copy of the sketch and slid it into her bag, her mind still circling that familiar handwriting. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together, and somewhere in it, her family's quiet past was beginning to surface. Newport was all sea air and grand old houses, mansions built by people who once had more money than they knew what to do with. Many of those homes had become private museums and historical collections, their rooms filled with the leftovers of a wealthier age. Somewhere among them, they believed the harbor light had finally come to rest. Olivia found it through patience and paperwork. She spent a full day inside the local historical society, matching the false shipping name from the lighthouse records against donation logs from decades past. By evening, she had a name and an address. A small private collection, housed in a stone mansion on a quiet street, run by a foundation that took in forgotten estates when their owners died without heirs. "A painting was donated to them 30 years ago," Olivia said, reading from her notes. "No artist listed, described only as a seascape with a lighthouse. It's been hanging in a back room ever since, considered too minor to display properly. Hidden in plain sight," Jack said softly. "After all the moving and the secrecy, it ended up forgotten on a wall, where no one ever looked twice. The foundation's curator was a polite woman who saw no reason to refuse a group of respectful researchers, especially when Jack mentioned, truthfully, that he was writing about the history of coastal families. She led them through quiet rooms, hung with portraits and old maps, until they reached a small parlor near the back. And there it was. The harbor light hung between two larger paintings, easy to miss. It was exactly as Grace had described, a simple seascape, a white lighthouse on a rocky point, gray water beneath a pale sky. The kind of painting a person's eyes would slide right past. Sophia stood before it and felt her heart pound. 40 years of searching, and it had been hanging quietly in a back room the whole time. "May we examine the frame?" Ethan asked the curator. "We believe it may be of historical interest. We'll be very careful." The curator hesitated, then agreed, on the condition that she remain in the room. Ryan stepped forward with steady hands and lifted the painting gently from the wall, laying it face down on a cloth-covered table. The frame was old and plain, the wood darkened with age. But when Ryan turned it over, Sophia recognized it at once, from the sketch in her bag. The compartments were there, along the inner edges, exactly where the diagram had marked them. "The seals have never been broken," Olivia whispered, comparing the frame to the drawing. "Whatever's inside has been there since the day your grandmother repaired it." With the curator's nervous permission and Ryan's careful tools, they opened the compartments one by one. Each held a single page, rolled tight and yellowed, but perfectly preserved, protected from light and air for all these years. There were several of them, just as the sketch had promised. Sophia unrolled them on the table, while Olivia laid out her research beside each one. And as the pages came together, the truth finally revealed itself. They were not treasure maps in any romantic sense. They were legal documents. Old deeds and signed agreements, handwritten and witnessed, describing stretches of coastal land in careful detail. Each page named a boundary, a marker, a parcel. Together, they formed a complete record of ownership for a long line of properties along the coast. "These prove who the land belonged to," Olivia said, her voice hushed with awe. "The original owner bought all of it, legally and properly. But when he died, the documents that would transfer it to his rightful heirs were never filed. Instead, someone hid them, here, inside this frame." Jack read over her shoulder, shaking his head slowly. So the land sat in limbo for decades. On paper, it belonged to no one, because the proof of ownership was missing. Anyone could have made a claim if they'd had these papers, and anyone who wanted to steal that claim needed these papers to disappear forever. Benjamin sank into a chair, looking genuinely stunned. The painting was never valuable. We always knew that. But none of us understood why the frame mattered so much. He laughed quietly, without humor. Land, plain, ordinary land that became worth a fortune as the years passed and the coastline filled with money. Generations of collectors chasing what they thought was hidden gold, and it was deeds the whole time. Proof of ownership, the most ordinary thing in the world. Sophia stared at the pages. So, the men at the restaurant, the ones hunting my grandmother's journals, they want these documents. They want to control the land, Ethan said grimly, or make sure no one else can claim it. With these papers in the right hands, someone could prove ownership of property worth more than any of them imagined. With them destroyed, the land stays free for the taking. The curator had gone pale, listening. "I had no idea," she murmured. "It's been hanging here all this time." Benjamin rose and looked at the documents with something like sorrow. "I gave my whole life to this. My mentor gave his, and the answer was never a thief's prize at all. It was someone trying to protect what was right, someone trying to make sure the land found its way to the people it truly belonged to." He shook his head. "We were all chasing the wrong story." Sophia gathered the fragile pages with great care. She had come into this thinking it was about danger and stolen art, and instead she had uncovered something far older and far quieter. Not a crime exactly, a secret kept for a reason no one had yet understood. And as she looked again at the careful handwriting on the deeds, that flicker of familiarity returned, stronger now, tugging at the edges of her memory. The answer was close. She could feel it. "We need to show these to my grandmother," she said. "I think she's the only one who can tell us what they really mean." They brought the documents to Martha's vineyard, where Grace had agreed to meet them. She was staying in a small rented cottage near the water, somewhere quiet and out of the way, while the search for her stolen journals continued. Sophia had not told her what they found. She wanted to see her grandmother's face when the old woman saw the pages for herself. Grace was waiting on the porch when they arrived, a shawl around her shoulders against the sea breeze. She looked smaller than Sophia remembered, but her eyes were sharp as ever. Introductions were quick. When Ethan, Jack, Olivia, and Benjamin had all settled around the kitchen table, Sophia laid the recovered deeds gently in front of her grandmother. "We found the painting, Grandma," she said softly, "and we opened the frame. These were inside, the same compartments you found all those years ago. Nobody ever opened them until now." Grace put on her glasses with trembling hands and bent over the pages. For a long moment, she said nothing, reading slowly, her finger moving line by line. The room held its breath. Then her hand went still, and she made a small sound, almost like a gasp. "This name," she whispered. She tapped a signature near the bottom of one of the deeds. "I know this name." Sophia leaned in. "Who is it?" Grace looked up, and her eyes were wet. "Thomas Aldridge. He was a dear friend of my grandfather, the closest friend he ever had. When I was a little girl, my grandfather used to tell stories about him. The two of them grew up together. Thomas became a shipping man, made his fortune buying land along the coast, while my grandfather stayed a simple craftsman." She touched the old paper as if touching the past itself. "I haven't heard that name spoken in 70 years. The pieces began to turn in Sophia's mind, slow and then all at once. The familiar handwriting, the careful loops. It had not been her grandmother's hand on the sketch, nor on these deeds. It had been someone close to her family, someone connected by friendship across generations. "Grandma," Sophia said carefully, "the painting frame, the one you repaired. Who brought it to you?" Grace was quiet for a long moment, searching a memory buried under decades. "An old man," she said finally. "He never gave his real name, but he knew things about my family he shouldn't have known. He mentioned my grandfather. I thought it was strange at the time. I assumed he'd simply heard of us." Her voice broke a little. "I think now he came to me on purpose. He chose me because he trusted my family, because of Thomas." Jack leaned forward gently. "So the documents weren't hidden by a thief at all." Grace shook her head slowly, understanding dawning on her face. "No, Thomas Aldridge died without close family of his own. He had all this land, bought honestly over a lifetime, but no clear heirs, and a world full of people who would have torn it apart the moment he was gone." She looked at the deeds with something like tenderness. He must have feared the documents would be lost, or stolen, or twisted by people who wanted the land for themselves. So he hid the proof somewhere safe, inside a painting nobody would value, and he made sure that if it was ever lost, someone he trusted could find it again. "He turned his proof of ownership into a secret," Olivia said quietly, "and he built a trail of clues so the truth could survive him." "There was no crime," Benjamin said. He had spent his whole life believing he was chasing a great mystery of theft and greed, and now he sat humbled. No conspiracy, no stolen treasure, just one man trying to protect what was rightfully his, in the only way he could think of, and the rest of us turned it into a legend that drove people half mad for 40 years. Sophia felt something shift inside her. For days she had carried a low fear, the sense that her family was tangled in something dangerous, maybe even something shameful. Now she understood it was the opposite. Her grandmother had been chosen because she came from good people. Her family had unknowingly stood at the edge of a kindness that lasted generations. "You kept his secret without even knowing it," Sophia said to Grace. "You repaired that frame and handed it back, and never opened the compartments. You protected the truth, without realizing what you were protecting." Grace wiped her eyes. "I always wondered why that painting stayed with me all these years. The memory of it. I told myself it was none of my business, and I let it go, but part of me never forgot." She reached across the table and took Sophia's hand. "And now you've finished what I left unfinished." The girl who stopped a stranger outside a restaurant and unraveled a secret 70 years old. Ethan, who had been silent and watchful through all of it, finally spoke. "There's still the matter of the men who want these documents gone. They broke into your home. They've been following the same trail. As long as the rightful ownership isn't made official and public, these papers are dangerous to keep and dangerous to lose. Then we make it public," Jack said firmly. "We bring it into the light, with records and proof and witnesses. Once the truth is on the official record, there's nothing left for anyone to steal. You can't hide what the whole world already knows." Sophia looked at the deeds spread across her grandmother's table, then at the faces gathered around it. Strangers a week ago, and now bound together by a secret that had finally come home. "Then that's what we do," she said. "We give Thomas Aldridge's truth back to the world, the way he always wanted." Grace squeezed her hand, and for the first time in days, she smiled. It took weeks to do it properly. The Boston Historical Society became their headquarters, its quiet halls filled with the steady work of bringing a 70-year-old secret into the open. Olivia spent her days buried in county records and old land surveys, matching every deed to its place on the map. Jack worked the official side, filing the documents with the right offices, gathering witnesses, building a record so complete that no one could ever question it again. Ethan handled the men who had started it all. He did it the way he handled everything, quietly and without fuss. Once the documents were copied, verified, and placed on the public record, there was nothing left for anyone to steal. The land's true history belonged to everyone now. The men who had broken into Grace's home and followed them across the coast simply melted away. Their game finished the moment the secret stopped being a secret. There was no fortune left to chase in the shadows. Sophia later learned that Grace's missing journals were quietly returned, left in a box on the cottage porch one morning with no note. Whoever had taken them no longer had any use for them. On the day it all became official, they gathered in the great reading room of the Historical Society. A small crowd had come, drawn by the strange and wonderful story that had begun to spread. The land rights were the heart of it. After decades of belonging to no one, the coastal properties Thomas Aldridge had bought across his lifetime were finally traced to their rightful descendants. Aldridge had no children of his own, but careful research uncovered a handful of distant relatives, ordinary people scattered across the country who had no idea they were connected to such a story. They learned, all at once, that a man they had never heard of had spent his life protecting something for them, and had trusted in the kindness of a friend's family to see it through. The land that had become so valuable over the years would go where it was always meant to go. Jack published the full account, and it was the finest work of his life. He told it not as a tale of crime and greed, but as the story it truly was. A story about a man who feared losing what mattered, and the quiet chain of trust that had carried his truth safely across the better part of a century. People who had spent years whispering about the harbor light finally understood that the legend had been wrong from the start. There had never been a thief, only a guardian. Olivia received recognition for her research from the historical community, her careful work credited with solving a mystery that had defeated collectors and scholars for 40 years. She accepted it shyly, already eyeing the next forgotten puzzle on a dusty shelf somewhere. Benjamin Cross stood at the back of the room that day, watching it all with quiet eyes. The search that had consumed his whole life was finally over, and the answer was nothing like he had imagined. He found Sophia afterward and took her hand gently. "My mentor would have hated this ending," he said with a soft, tired smile. "No treasure, no glory, just an old man's decency, finally honored." He shook his head. "But I think it's the only ending worth having. Thank you for letting me see it through." Grace, too, finally stepped into the light. She spoke that day about her years as an art restorer, the career she had hidden for so long, and the painting that had passed through her hands and shaped a story she never knew she was part of. People listened to the gentle old woman with rapt attention, and Sophia watched her grandmother stand a little taller than she had in years. And Sophia herself became known, quietly and warmly, as the woman whose quick warning had started the whole adventure. The waitress who ran out into the cold to stop a stranger from walking into a trap, and in doing so, pulled a forgotten piece of history back into the world. People she had never met thanked her. She found it strange and a little overwhelming, but underneath it, she felt a deep, steady contentment. Ethan found her near the tall windows when the crowd had thinned, the afternoon light golden on the old wooden floors. "I keep thinking about that night," he said. "If I'd walked into that restaurant, none of this would have happened. Those men would have asked me about a painting I'd never heard of, and I'd have had no answers, and it might have ended badly." He looked at her. One simple decision, not to go inside, and it led to all of this. Sophia smiled. "You can thank a nosy waitress for that." "I do," he said. Every day, they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the people drift through the hall, the story they had uncovered, now belonging to the world. That evening, back at the cottage, Grace sat by the fire, with one of her recovered journals open in her lap. Sophia settled beside her, content for the first time in weeks. The mystery was solved, the land returned, the truth set free. It felt like an ending, a good one. Then Grace went very still. "Sophia," she said slowly, turning the journal toward the firelight. "Look at this." There was an entry near the back, in Grace's own younger hand, that she had written decades ago and forgotten entirely. A short note about another piece she had once restored, and a single line that made the hair on Sophia's arms rise. The second frame. He said there was always a second frame. Sophia stared at the words, her heart beginning to quicken all over again. The story of the harbor light was finished, every thread of it tied. But somewhere out there, it seemed, another secret was still waiting. She looked at her grandmother. Grace looked back, and slowly, both of them smiled.